Okay, this video will look at just setting up a very simple referencing pipeline, just feeding back on top of the explanation from the intro to referencing. And what we'll do is I'll just set up a simple sphere and a cube. I'll go through and skin it, skin weight it. I'll go through and set up a simple rig, and we'll go and animate it, all being referenced into each other. Okay, so firstly, obviously with any pipeline you need to plan the whole pipeline and understand how it's been structured. I've set up this folder called pipeline on my desktop, and this is literally what we're going to use. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call it Geo. Let's call it model, okay, just to show you that naming conventions, it doesn't really matter as long as it's meaningful. Let's create a folder and call it bind, doesn't really matter. Let's create a folder and call it rig, and then let's create a folder and call it anim. Okay. So literally the models go in here, then they get passed through to the bind and a skeleton applied and skin weighted. They then get passed through to the rig, and the controls are set up, and then they get passed on to the animator, and animation happens. Okay, so let's go into Maya and literally let's do something that's going to test your modeling prowess. Let's create a sphere. Let's bump it up to 100, which kind of gives it a meter. Oh, let's make it 10. Yeah, I think that's fine. Okay. Again, freeze transforms, delete history, and I'm just going to call this ball. Okay. Nothing major there. File, save scene as. I'm going to go to my desktop. It was in pipeline. I'm going to save it into model and call it ball. Okay. Delete that. Let's set up another one. This time, go to cube, change that to 10. Okay. Freeze transforms, delete history. Let's just call this brick. That's okay. So obviously in your outliner that's called brick. File, save scene as, and in the model folder I'm going to call this brick. Okay. So I'm just showing you, literally you might have character models that are starting to come through. They would all go into the pipeline model folder. So I've got two files there. Okay. Let's start a new scene. I'm going to reference in the ball. Okay. So you'll find it under the file menu, create reference. Let's bring open up the dialog box. Now, the critical thing, if I reset settings, the critical thing with referencing, I think it defaults usually at use selected namespace. I always choose the middle one. Okay, as soon as you choose the middle one, in the namespace options, a little text box comes up, and this allows you to put in a prefix, and this, by doing it this way, you can make sure that your reference files are super organized, and you can very quickly identify where the referencing is coming from. Okay, I like to keep this is my own habits. I like to keep my prefixes between 3 and 4 characters, and again, just habit, I capitalize them so I can very clearly see what is a reference. Okay, so let's call it geo, because that is the geo file coming in, and click on reference. It's in the model folder, and I'm going to reference in the ball, and as you can see, I've got the ball comes in, I'm referencing it in. Okay, go to my outliner, and there I can see that I've got the prefix geo, and it's separated with a colon, and that's called ball. Right? And another indication it's a reference is that you've got that blue diamond, which now indicates that that's a referenced folder. Okay, so that's now referenced in. Let's create a skeleton or a joint. The models are not complex, so I'm just going to create a single joint. Skeleton joint tool, can click anywhere, and then once I zero everything out, if I go to shading, X-ray joints, then I can see that my joint is in the middle of the object. Okay, I can change the radius of the joint to make it a little bit clearer. That's just a visual representation of the joint. And literally I'm going to call this, let's call it bind underscore main underscore JNT. Okay, I always end joints with a suffix, a 3-letter suffix, JNT. For groups, GRP, just so that you can very quickly organize and select your joints. Okay, so that's my joint there, that's my reference. If I want to, I can select them both and group them. Okay, so I could call this bind underscore GRP, so I know that I'm just using the group as a quick way of organizing. That's all I'm doing. Okay, and now to skin weight. So select the joint, shift, select the geometry, skin, let's do smooth bind, selected joint, closest distance. These are all fine because I've only just got one joint, and bind skin. Okay, an indication that it's bound is that all the transforms are locked out, and if I just select that joint and move it, it's obviously moving the joint and the object as well. So this object is referencing. I can still skin weight smooth bind to a referenced object, and also I get the skin cluster node as well. So that's a fair indication that it's been bound correctly. Okay. File, save scene as. This time I'm going to save that into the bind, and I'm going to call this ball. So I'm calling it the same file. I'm just working on the fact that the folders are separating paths out, so that's absolutely fine. Okay, start a new scene. Let's reference in the cube and do the same thing. So create reference, geo, the middle one, and reference, go to model, reference in the brick. Okay, joint, create that. Okay, shade in X-ray joints just so that you can see it. Now this is critical. It has to be called the same. So it was called bind underscore main underscore JNT, and I grouped it, and this was called bind underscore group. So I'm bringing in consistencies with the skeleton and the group, okay, and then literally select them both and smooth bind, and that should keep just to test. Yeah, so that's all cool. Okay. File, save scene as, this time into bind, and this one again is called brick. Okay. So now I've got two geometry objects. They have been referenced in, and both have been given a skeleton which is exactly the same, called the same. So now let's start a new scene file. So the new scene is literally the rig. Okay. Again, let's reference in. This time I'm going to call it bind. Reference that in, and I'm going to reference in the ball. Okay, Maya does the funky shader thing. So ultimately I can see that the skin weighted file had the prefix of bind, and I set up the group, and you can see that had the reference of the geo, so that's got bind colon geo colon, so I know that's there's like a hierarchy of reference going in there. Okay, now if you also want another look at how that's organized, you can go to File, Reference Editor, and you can see that I'm referencing in the bind, and if I click on that arrow, that's got a reference called geo. Okay, so that's the child reference getting referenced into there, and this is the one that I'm referencing in my scene. Okay, all right. So I am going to set up another joint, because I like to keep my rig and bind skeleton separately. So I'm just going to create a joint, zero it out. You know, actually, another easy way of doing this, if you just type in joint and enter, it automatically creates a joint at the origin, so that saves me moving it. Let's give it a radius. Oh, let's keep the radius as is, so that I can see the difference. And then this time I'm going to call it rig underscore main underscore JNT. Okay, so the prefix is what separates it out. They were both called main underscore JNT. Okay. I am now going to create a controller. So let me scale that out. So I've just created an herbs control, freeze transforms delete history, and let's call it main rig main underscore CTRL control. Okay. So that's been set to 0. I can, if I look at my hierarchy, I can parent the rig joint to that control, so I'll do that now. Okay. So when I select and move the control, it moves that joint, the rig joint that I've just set up. It's not yet moving the bind joint that I'm referencing in. Okay, so let's just undo that. So literally, let's do that through constraints. So select the rig joint, shift select the bind joint, constrain parent is fine, maintain offset, yeah, because they're sat in the right position, and click on apply. Okay, so you can see that the bind joint has now been constrained to that rig joint I set up. And again, to test it, I can move the controller and it's moving everything. It's moving, the controller is moving the rig joint, and that rig joint is driving the bind joint, and the geometry is skinned to that bind joint. Okay, so that's all good. And literally save scene as, and that goes into my rig file, and I call this ball. Okay. Right, so that's the rig setup. I'm now going to send that off to the animator. And again, even the animator, new scene, I will reference in, create reference, and this time always call the prefix whatever the file is coming in. So the rig is coming in, so that's literally what I'm going to call the prefix. Reference that in, and the ball. Okay. And so literally this is what the animator is going to be working with. The first thing that the animator, I always get the animator to do is, I don't want, you can see that joints and everything are visible. I don't want those visible so that the animator accidentally selects them and starts putting keys and starts destroying everything. So I always, whenever I'm animating, show none, and then just bring back polygons and bring back curves. Okay, so they're the only two things visible in the scene, and as a last security measure, turn on the filtering for geometry, so there's no way I'm going to select that. So literally the only thing the animator can select is the NURBS curve. Okay, I'm just going to key, let's take it to 40 frames, key start and end, then at 20, lift it up there and key it. Okay. Okay, so you can see that the ball is bouncing, and that's because I'm referencing in the rig, and that's referencing in the skin file, and that's referencing in the geo. Okay, so the beauty of this is, if I go to File, Reference Editor, I can see I've got a 3-tier hierarchy of referencing. So I've got the geo, which gets referenced into the bind, and that gets referenced into the rig. Okay, and each reference, first it's the rig, then it goes rig bind, and then it goes rig bind geo. Okay, so I can see all the prefixes that I've given each one. Okay, so the animator started animating, and let's say, for example, I want to swap the bind file because I set up the brick. So you can click on the reference. Okay, so let's select the bind, right click and go to reference, replace reference, and I'm going to swap the bind from the ball to the brick. And as you can see, the animation remains intact, but it's now driving the brick, sorry, and that's because the brick was skinned to the same skeleton, and that was named the same. So this is the beauty of referencing, and once it's set up with decent naming conventions, then everything is working quite nicely. Okay.